Hey friends, I'm trying out something new today. My face is not usually in the video, but some of you may enjoy watching me speak and talking with my hands, so we're going to see how this goes. Today's topic that we'll be covering is a review of Middle Ages Europe and the Age of Exploration. So our essential question that we'll be answering: what were the conditions in the late Middle Ages that encouraged European exploration? For those of you who are not familiar with the Middle Ages, we're going to have a brief review. The Middle Ages are typically defined as between 500 and 1500 in Europe, an age where people were very superstitious, uneducated, they knew little about the outside world. They believed in magic and witchcraft and relied on religion to answer their questions instead of searching out answers in a scientific manner. Whenever map makers drew pictures of sea monsters on the maps, they would often draw, or drew maps of the world, they would draw sea monsters because they were ignorant about the world around them. So, another word for the Middle Ages are the Dark Ages because there were little technological advances and very little curiosity about the world around them. Here is a map that was drawn during the Middle Ages. We can clearly see here Africa and the continent of Europe up here. This is India, so they roughly knew what the coastline of Asia looked like. But if we look over here where North and South America are supposed to be, we can see that they've drawn some type of land, but clearly they thought that there was water here. They didn't realize that there were two vast continents that connected. So whenever the first explorers were going out, many of them were looking for an all-water route over here to Asia. They did not realize that there was a whole other half of the world populated by people. During the Middle Ages, there were also the Crusades in the Middle East. If you should be familiar with these from world history. The Crusades led to increased contact between Europe and the Middle East. So during this time, Europeans gained more knowledge. They also were exposed to new luxury goods that they wanted to have all the time. So this led to more trade in between Europe and the Middle East and also Asia. If we're trading more, we want to do it faster. But before we get there, let's talk about the Renaissance. The Renaissance means a rebirth. So it was a period of cultural rebirth in Europe, moving out of the Dark Ages. There was once again a focus on literature and art and philosophy, things that had been absent in Europe throughout the Middle Ages. The Renaissance led to new ways of thinking and also more curiosity about the world around them. How do you think that this might affect exploration efforts? You're probably familiar with a man named Martin Luther. He is known for nailing his 95 Theses on the door of the church, and his 95 Theses criticized the practices of the Roman Catholic Church, things such as indulgences and corruption. Martin Luther set out to reform the church. He wanted the Catholic Church to just be better, but instead he started a religious revolution throughout Europe called the Protestant Reformation. During the Protestant Reformation, people all across Europe began to turn against the Pope and against the Catholic Church. These people were known as Protestants. If you haven't noticed, I'm going to go back to the other slide. The root word in Protestant is protest, right? These were people who were protesting the Catholic Church. So this map shows us Europe after the Reformation. We can see here from the color code that most of Europe was still Catholic. However, we can see pockets of different Protestant religions or different Protestant sects, Lutheran, Calvinist, and the Anglican Church of England, as well as other groups. As you can imagine, the Catholic Church was not happy about people leaving the church behind. This would cost them money and tithes, and it would also limit their power. So there was the Catholic Counter-Reformation. This is when the Catholics were trying to convince people to stay within the Catholic Church by promising to reform it. This led to conversion efforts all across Europe, especially in places like Spain, and also the birth of a new religious group, the Jesuits. Part of the reconversion efforts were carried out by the Spanish Inquisition. This was established by the King and Queen Ferdinand and Isabella in Spain to maintain the Catholic religion. If you were not part of the Catholic Church, you would be persecuted and discriminated against, sometimes, as we can see in this picture, even tortured or killed. So this was especially rough on populations of Jewish people and Muslims that lived within Spain. They were either forced to convert or forced to leave. The Spanish Inquisition also sent Jesuits to the New World to convert Native Americans. So obviously there's a lot of religious strife happening in Europe between Catholic and Protestant groups. So the reason we talk about all this is to figure out, what does religion have to do with exploration? Think about this for a second. See if you can come up with 2 reasons that religion influenced exploration. Two reasons that we can list that you should be familiar with is that people began to leave parts of Europe to search for religious freedom, to escape that persecution they faced for their beliefs. And also, in the case of the Jesuits, people come to the New World to convert Native Americans. So that's going to be 2 major factors that religion plays in exploration: religious freedom and converting people to Christianity. So let's talk a bit about the age of exploration. We're just going to look at some of the major European explorers. Marco Polo is one of the first explorers that left a record of his exploration. He traveled to China in 1271, and he did write a book about his travels called The Book of the Marvels of the World, or The Travels of Marco Polo. The second is definitely easier to say. So Marco Polo talked about what he encountered on his travels, and this inspired more trade from other explorers for luxury goods, and for more people who just wanted adventure, wanted to get out there and see what the world had to offer. So after Marco Polo wrote his book, there is increased trade and travel between Europe and the Far East. We can see here a map of Marco Polo's travels, first over land and then also by water. During the Age of Exploration, we also saw improvements in technology. A faster and better built ship called the Caravel made traveling across the water easier. Better maps made it easier to navigate, as well as the astrolabe also helped explorers navigate their way to the New World, or in the Old World too, just finding quicker trade routes. So Prince Henry the Navigator was from Portugal, and he is generally regarded as the main initiator of the Age of Discovery. What he did was fund exploration efforts to sailors from Portugal to explore the coastline of Africa, searching for gold and also for trade routes. He made Portugal a leader in exploration. He's credited with establishing the first school for navigation. So a very important guy getting into the Age of Exploration as far as advancements in map making and figuring out the art of navigation. We can see here some of the early Portugal trade voyages along the African coast. All of these explorations were funded by Prince Henry the Navigator. Bartholomew Diaz was also from Portugal. He is credited as the first European to sail around the tip of Africa. Around the tip of Africa was a very mythical place. Within Europe, this is where they thought a lot of the sea monsters lived. So a very treacherous journey. Obviously, Bartholomew Diaz did not run into any sea monsters because they did not exist, but he was the first to sail around the southern tip of Africa. Vasco da Gama, also from Portugal, was the first to reach India by sea. We can see here his trade route made it there and came all the way back. Africa, as you know, is one of our largest continents in the world, so this trip took a very long time. People are going to be very anxious to find a quicker way to get to India by sea. Pedro Cabral, also from Portugal, landed on the coast of Brazil, so he's credited with discovering these places, discovering Brazil, put claims on Brazil for Portugal. And now we come to Ferdinand and Isabella. These are names that you are probably familiar with, King and Queen of Spain. And the role that they played in exploration is the funding of Christopher Columbus. So Christopher Columbus was born in Italy. He is of Italian descent. However, Spain was the country that was willing to fund his exploration efforts. What Christopher Columbus set out to do was find an all-water route to Asia. He first landed in the Caribbean. He believed that he had reached India because he was not aware of the continents North and South America. And that's why Native Americans today still have the name Indians. So we remember Christopher Columbus for discovering the New World. However, keep in mind, can you discover a place that has been inhabited by millions of people for thousands of years? Right? This is a very Eurocentric view that this place was discovered by Christopher Columbus. We can see here the 4 voyages of Columbus and his men. 1492, you may know the rhyme, in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That was his first trip. And eventually he explored more of the Caribbean and the coastline of Central America. So, what were the conditions in the Middle Ages that led to exploration? Can we answer our essential question? Pause the video and take time to think about this, see what you come up with. Hopefully your list consists of these 3 things, maybe more if you have a solid foundation in world history. But we talked about religion, how that influenced exploration. We talked about advancements in technology and map making that made exploration easier, and also the want for trade routes to India and to other parts of Asia to get those luxury goods, specifically an all-water route. So those were all conditions during the Middle East that helped contribute to exploration. One of the reasons why Christopher Columbus is so important in our history is because of the Columbian Exchange. So other Europeans had landed in what's called the New World prior to Columbus, but Columbus's expedition kicked off a global transfer of food, plants, animals, and disease that did not exist prior to the New World. These were initiated by the voyages of Columbus. So this image shows us some of the things that were exchanged during the Columbian Exchange. So this arrow shows things going from the Americas to the Old World. All right, prior to the Columbian Exchange, Europe, Africa, and Asia did not have corn. They did not have tomatoes or potatoes. The potatoes may be especially surprising to those of you who know how much Ireland depends on potatoes, right? Those did not exist until after Columbus's voyages. Those were brought to the Old World. And then from the Old World to the Americas, we see citrus fruits, grapes, bananas, sugarcane, coffee beans. May be surprising, right? Whenever we think about coffee, a lot of times we think about South America, but those did not exist prior to the Columbian Exchange. The most significant transfer of the Columbian Exchange is this list of diseases. We know that the transfer of diseases to people who had no immunity built up in North America, especially things like smallpox and the flu, resulted in the deaths of millions of Native Americans throughout North and South America and in the Caribbean. So look at this image. Be familiar with all of the things that were traded during the Columbian Exchange, the livestock that was brought from Europe to the Americas. And that is the end of our lesson.